Good afternoon. It is now 4 o'clock. I'd like to call the Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
Livingston,
Here.
Mackey,
Here.
Newton. Miss Newton was online. I don't see her. We have a quorum.
Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes from our August 29th, 2023 meeting. Motion to accept the minutes. I'll second.
Livingston,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton. Motion approved.
Next is the adoption of the agenda. Do you have any edits or additions from staff?
No, Madam Chair.
After Madam Chair.
I'd like to, make an amendment to the agenda. The agenda that was posted online was slightly out of order. The agenda should have had our dashboard update first, and then second would be Goal 2, Invest in Economic Development, Objective 2.3, which is a outside presentation as well. So that would be the second item. So just the same two things, but different order. So I would like to publicly make that amendment.
That.
Thank you. Second.
Livingston, Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right. Before
Madam Clerk, will you note that I'm here as well? This is Shakise Newton.
Hi, Ms. Newton. Also, before we begin, want to recognize Councilwoman Gretchen Barron, who's joining us today. Thank you. And then I don't see anybody else online, correct, Madam Clerk?
No, ma'am.
All right. So first item is our strategic planning update with a dashboard update. The last meeting we had, we got some updates from staff related to our consultant doing survey and workshops to kind of hone in on our reports and metrics. And so we'd like to get an update on that. And then as well, we have our printed dashboard update that I believe staff will go through a few items there. ACA Thomas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it pleases the chairman, I'd like to have the presentation led today by our Director of Budget, Abhi Deshpande.
Thank you. Recognized.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Abhi Deshpande, Director of Budget. So, as you mentioned last time when we talked, we had informed the committee that we have engaged and partnered with outside consultant in order to develop goal-related performance measures as well as operationalize that plan for each goal-wise. So since then, I'm very happy to report and kind of proud that the everyone on the staff, all the department heads and the kind of goal owners have worked tremendously hard for over 4 to 6 weeks with the consultant in order to streamline the entire process, as well as with this presentation, the staff is submitting some of the recommendations in order to how we can amend our county's strategic planning or strategic plan going forward. So with that, we had 4 sessions which were attended by each department head, department director, and their staff members who are working on this strategic plan or that or the goals related to their business area. then each goal owner, as we have the 6 different goals, and each department were divided in between these 6 different goal area. For example, for goal number 3, which is related to all the fiscal responsibility and the transparency and kind of accountability area. So that's where all the central services such as budget, finance, risk management, procurement, these departments, they took lead on that particular goal. That is an example. So the same thing, various different departments, they became the goal owners for this particular goal area. With that, what I'm going to showcase is, if you remember last time when we met in August, the overall the progress meter that we have through our software, we were around like 27% on the progress in order to achieve our strategic plan or implement our strategic plan. So with that, I'm just going to showcase that meter right now. Where are we at with this last 3 months work? So this is what you see on your screen is basically that 27% has become now 33%. As in summary, also you can see that out of we have around at this point we have around 97 different initiatives. Out of that, 10 are completed. And we are almost more than 50%, like 52 different initiatives. They are on the track. There has been like some dispersion, like which is like a very minor for a couple of initiatives, but which is really we need to have some more discussion as a body together from the council as well as some of the staff goal area related goal owners. But overall, we have. Last 2-3 months work has taken our progress from 27% to 33%. And mostly the major progress that we had, which was related to the goal number 1, which is really the good fostering good governance. And what we are doing with this project with the Invisio and kind of creating more streamlined plan and kind of getting more creating more department or goal owners and also assigning different department heads to each strategies, initiatives, and coming up with this really meaningful performance measures that is really falls under that goal number 1 area, which is the fostering good governance. And that goal has really made the progress, contributed to the progress in this last quarter. That's on the very high level overview here. What I gave you a printout at this point, which was not in the agenda, but Madam Clerk, if we could showcase that report, please. So basically, this is the again the management report that based on some of the updates. So if we scroll to the next page, Madam Clerk. So that's right, yeah, that's here. So for example, very first one, which is the 1.1.1, and you can see the last update was each goal is assigned to team of department or / staff members. So this is the kind of the goal number 1 related to all the initiatives about the goal 1, which is basically the same thing what we did it last 2-3 months, and hence you can see the updates there. But that's kind of again very high level overview. If you have any questions so far.
Questions from any council members?
Okay, so the main thing I would like to talk or kind of report to you today is the staff recommendations that came out from this process for last couple months is the which is in your agenda packet, which is the revised strategic plan. So the way that this the table that you see on in front of you is really the old initiative that you had, and in the initiative description, and based on various different discussions among the staff members and the department owners, then this is the fourth column, which basically says about the revised initiative description, which is the recommended by the staff members. Sorry, go ahead. That's in the packet, yes. And the last column is which is the council, the communication to the council or notes to consider. For example, like this initiative 1.1.1, the really kind of description or kind of recommendation here is to compile a list of goals assigned with strategic plan and the department's task in moving the goal forward. However, it also says that it consolidate with 1.1.3 and 1.3.1 because all the next two initiatives are talking about the kind of similar language or similar scope. So hence, the staff is recommending that amend the language a little bit of that first initiative and also consolidate that with the next two initiatives. Also at the same time, then we'll discontinue that 1.1.3 and 1.3.1. The same thing for 1.1.2, we are recommending that we should discontinue this because it is completed now. Going forward, again, the same thing is the third initiative in the first goal that again relates to the first initiative. So that's why it's a discontinue because it is consolidated with 1.1.1.1 and 1.3.1. So that's the kind of example.
And just a clarifying question. So recommendation of consolidating some of the initiatives that are listed, would that require council to take any action with the full strategic plan itself, or is this consolidation just referring to the dashboard? Can you just explain when you say consolidation?
Sure. So no, I think what my understanding is with consolidation, changing the language, it will require council approval, adoption. So we'll have to go through that legal process of adopting the new strategic plan. And what my understanding is that in the strategic planning forum also we can discuss all these different initiatives in detail and why. We can explain that more. For example, the goal owner from, let's select from goal number 2, they can explain their reasoning behind why they are recommending that to you. And I think just as in the very initial process, the way council adopted through the legal process, the same thing, I think we'll have to update and amend the strategic plan. Then, and actually that is also, you're bringing a good point because that is also related to the dashboard, because once you adopt or amend this plan, then actually, we can work with the consultant to actually make it more concise performance measures as well. Yeah.
Madam Clerk, I can't see.
Yeah, so basically, that is this is like, as we know, we have around 97 different initiatives, but really with this, all the recommendations, I'm forcing around that, maybe we'll end up around, if council chooses to adopt all the recommendations or any kind of, it would end up around 50 different initiatives. So, but definitely it will be a concise strategic plan that we can be able to monitor, because the staff, are they going to be really the responsible to implement that and monitor that. Also, some of the measures, initiative language was very vague language. really doesn't allow us to what exactly are we measuring here, how are we going to collect that particular measure, if it is related to quantitative measure or the qualitative measure. So those kind of recommendations, definitely, the staff as a group together by each goal, they spend a good amount of hours discussing this as a group and various different easily every goal area had around two to three different group meetings to discuss all these different different language or different recommendations. So definitely, it will be a concise strategic plan for county to monitor.
And would it, I guess, as far as timeline goes, I know staff has these recommendations of consolidation, and at some point, whether it be now or the forum, we would need council to take some action on it so we can update strategic plan. Where along this way would the actual dashboard be made live for the public?
Sure. So with the current version of the strategic plan, we definitely on the track to, have at least 20 to 25 dashboards ready in January to be, for council to view initially in our strategic planning forum.
Can you you said 20 to 25 dashboards?
20 to 25 performance measures.
Out of the list of, we're hoping to get down to 50 something.
No,
What are you saying?
the 50 initiatives, but like some performance measures may be, really. For example, like one of the fiscal related, like let's say like the fund balance, which may be covering 2-3 different initiatives, but really what that emphasizing is really fiscal responsibility. And so that fund balance or budget actual dashboard will cover 2-3 different initiatives. So it may not be like every single one-to-one connection with the performance measure and the initiative. It could be that the initiatives could be around 50, but the performance measures could be around like 20 to 30. We can definitely develop some of the performance measure definitely as at some point we don't have data. And that's where, for example, one of the recommendations that you will hear that we might need to do some kind of citizen survey in future. So we don't have that data right now. So that kind of recommendation also you will see that at some point that will develop a future performance measure. But at this point, we will have at least 20 to 25 performance measures to showcase to the public dashboard. And then, as I said, like it is an ongoing kind of work, and eventually, at some point, we'll have larger number of performance measures developed. Yeah.
January?
Yeah, in January, like during the strategic planning forum, our consultant will make a presentation with those around 20 to 25 different dashboards.
After that?
And after that, we can make those that dashboard live to the public.
The Livingston, you recognize.
Just a clarification, I might need a whole lot of it too. Now, we will give some staff recommendations about changes and combining initiatives and objectives sometime in the future, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, right now you have that in front of you, but also we can definitely give a detailed kind of presentation, or maybe at what I'm for. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just one minute. So, Mr. Livingston, in the agenda packet that we have, if you look on, not that. So the agenda packet is the last, I guess, starting on page 18 of the agenda packet. Yes, the extremely small print, that is correct. That is the, we're looking at the same page. So you'll see they have the first column.
I couldn't read that.
I know, it's on the
Okay.
screen too, but that's where they have the goal and the objective, and then they have their recommendation, which is the last column, where they say consolidate certain ones and what they need us to do. And so the staff is planning to, again, go over this at the forum, and be looking for us to either, accept or deny their recommendations so we can move forward with updates.
Pass now.
Okay, perfect.
Mr. Weaver?
Madam Chair, I just
Yes.
wanted to tell my esteemed colleague, Mr. Livingston, don't feel bad. I thought I was coming to transportation.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, though, so you can learn
But
all
I am
about
enjoying this
the strategic
nonetheless.
plan. Okay, so the recommendations are in the packet. There is an additional document, the 2023 strategic plan update, which is the reporting document that has just an outline of where staff is on all the items. So that just gives you where we are, the progress, the status, and that's just a holistic update. But what we're talking about is after January, pending everybody's okay, council wants to move forward, that then this dashboard that we've been discussing and viewing internally, that then we'll be able to make it live externally for the public then to be able to track and see where we are with the strategic plan and different objectives. So that's kind of the short-term timeline.
That's right. So yeah, means after that, like once the strategic planning forum, we can make those on the public-facing website live anytime around February, and then this is really means again the consultant are going to the second or third piece to that is actually the knowledge transfer as well as the user training, and that will also go around like next 2-3 months after the dashboards are live. And the whole idea is that now once we have these goal owners and goal areas assigned, and then they will be responsible to make periodic updates and provide the data in that dashboard. So
You said they, who?
so these will be the staff members. So for example, the goal number 3, basically the budget and finance is going to take over on that area. So goal number 1 could be some couple of other departments and the same thing. So that all the department leads will take over the responsibility to update all these different goal areas. So that the whole idea is to decentralize that and have the goal owners be responsible for you. Yeah, and that's pretty much, unless you have any questions.
Any questions or comments? Councilman Weaver, you good? Good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And we look forward to this full presentation in January.
Sure. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is Goal 2, Invest in Economic Development, Objective 2.3. And before we begin, I want to make sure the committee has the packet. So in our agenda packet, after the minutes, there is a presentation that you'll see in here titled Richland County P3. In our initial strategic plan development, Goal 2.3 is looking at the development of a public-private partnership. And so Ray Jones is here to walk through a presentation and then have some conversations with the committee about next steps. So, Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and other members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
There you go.
You'd think it was my first time. Madam Chair, other members of the committee, it's nice to see you. Happy holidays. Thank you for decorating for this meeting. Appreciate that. So the presentation that's in the packet, this is very similar to something that we discussed with council a month or so ago, and I thought it would be good for us to revisit it. At that time, the next step on the presentation was to have this matter assigned to committee, and here we are. But if I may, what we did before council and what I'll do today it's just a quick review of kind of how we got here. So in 2020, the county commissioned a strategic plan for economic development through a group called TIP Strategies out of Texas, and they delivered a work product to the county that was extremely well done. And within that work product, one of the critical recommendations was that the county consider forming a public-private partnership, also known as a P3. I also sometimes say nonprofit. I use those things interchangeably. I don't want to confuse you. But to do so in order to leverage the power of the private sector in Richland County and to enhance the county's economic development efforts. And so the council has been in conversation about that now for some time. Council made a visit to Greenville over a year ago now. Council is, I believe I'm correct when I say council is going to Spartanburg this year, and in order to look at how economic development is done in other parts of the state. At the end of last year, council adopted a resolution. They gave staff and gave us some direction. So our firm, working with Attorney Wright and the Economic Development Director, have been looking at options for how a P3 might be formed in Richland County, and are now bringing it to this committee for purposes of additional conversation. If you want to go to the next slide, Ms. Anette, thank you. One of the themes we've heard, and I think this is critical, maybe back it up one. This is critical for this group right there, are the areas of control. And when we talk about areas of control, we're talking about comparing how economic development works now versus how economic development might work differently in the event that the P3 is formed. And so we've identified 5 spheres of county control that are related to the P3. Let me start with what I don't think will change at all, and that's approval of incentives. The council approves incentives now. We don't ever envision a P3 being in a position where it would approve incentives, the power for which is granted to the county under state statute. But there are 4 other areas. One is funding and budget. Obviously, the county would be in charge of both the budget and the funding of any P3 organization. How the P3 operates would be yet another sphere of control. And then there's 2 other critical spheres of control that we spent a fair amount of time discussing in various forums, but I do think would ultimately end up being some important items for discussion for the committee. And that is, 1, the appointment of the nonprofit board, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. And then also the employment of the Economic Development Director and employees of the Economic Development Department, and we can talk more about that. So those are the 5 areas we've identified. Maybe let me just pause there, because one of the things we are very excited about in working with council and the committee on this is to get your feedback. And so maybe the first question would be, are we comfortable that these 5 areas are the 5 areas that council's concerned about? Do we think there'd be other areas of control that we need to take note of for council or include within this group?
Comments, thoughts from the committee? All right, hearing.
Well, Madam Chair, maybe a follow-up conversation would be maybe where the committee would like to maybe start a conversation today. Is there one of the spheres of control that would be of greater interest? And because we anticipate, hopefully and prayerfully, that we'll spend some time with this committee on this matter. Is there a place you'd like to start today, or would you like me to just take you through the end of the presentation and then we'll see where we go?
Councilman Weaver, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ray, like, what are other counties doing around us? Like, do they have this kind of partnership thing you talked about? Kershaw, Lexington, Fairfield. I mean, what are we not doing that they're doing?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And we do have a list of all of the P3 organizations around the state, but it's a mixed bag. So if you look just immediately around us, what you'll see largely is county-driven economic development. So Lexington has an economic development department, and a county employee is an economic development director. Kershaw, very similar. If you look a little further, like Orangeburg has a P3. If you look even further down I-26, Dorchester is a P3. If you look, Charleston is a P3. If you look In the Horry County area where Myrtle Beach is, it's a P3. If you look at the grouping of counties that are, well, if you start to then look in the upstate, Greenville has a P3, Spartanburg has a P3. Not all of them operate the same way. And one of the charges we believe council has given to this effort is, we appreciate what's happening in other places, let's make this uniquely Richland. Let's figure out how we want to do it. And so I guess the short of it is, you will find different models around the state. I think if you were to look at where major announcements have occurred in the last 3 to 5 years, Mr. Weaver, you would likely see that a number of those announcements are being made in places that have a combination of public and private interests working together for economic development.
So I think to kind of help us with conversation today, at least in some of my conversation with colleagues, I think the sphere of the appointment of the board has been a topic that I hear us have a lot of conversation about, and I think it'd be good to at least start there, get, some maybe feedback, thoughts on what we like to see, maybe what we're not in favor of, and at least think about what that looks like and what does work for us for possible considerations.
Absolutely. Maybe if we go one more slide, Ms. Anette. Perfect. Yes, I think that's right. It's a little off, I'm not sure why, but let me just explain it to you, because what I'm looking at looks different than what's up there. So we have talked a lot about appointment of the board. We have made some suggestions based upon what we've seen in other places, and those suggestions are as follows. We have suggested that there be a 9-member board, and that board would be comprised of 3 county council folks, sitting county council folks, the chair, the vice chair, and the economic development chair. The county would also have the power to appoint 2 additional members of the board, so direct, and then there would be 4 members of the board that would come, one of which would come from the geographic regions of council. So, north, south, east, west, we look generally to make sure that we had geographic representation so that all council districts felt like they had representation on the board. Those would be business and government leaders. Those 4 would be independent, if you will. The 5, or the controlling portion of the board, would be either county direct, i.e. elected officials, or county appointments. We would anticipate that the initial appointments to the board would be very much driven by county council. And then after that, the board would function in accordance with the bylaws, which would assign different terms to different classes of directors. So for instance, typically in Richland County, we're electing a chair and a vice chair once a year. So obviously, those positions would turn over. The economic development chair is normally appointed every year, so those positions would turn over. But the 2 appointees from the county may serve slightly longer. The 4 private sector folks may likewise serve slightly longer terms. But the idea would be to make sure that we had a couple things. 1, representation from across the county. 2, uniquely Richland in the sense that we want diversity on the board. And so those are things we've discussed. There are pros and cons to every proposal we might make to you. We made this proposal, perfect, thank you. We made this proposal just for purposes of generating discussion. For purposes of comparison, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Just an observation. If you look around at some of the other P3s around the state, it's most often boards that are serving, that are almost all private sector, with some appointees from the major funding counties. It is unusual, in my experience, to see that the major funding county would have the majority of the appointments on the board. But I think it's important to this council. And I think making this sort of shift in a county that has had a council as involved as this council has been over the years in economic development, it makes sense for this council to have more of an appointive power over the board, which is why that's been suggested that way. And further, it's been suggested, although, again, that's just what this is, it's just suggestions, that there would be the ability to ensure that we've got folks from around the county. So that's that last point, that we'd have 4 private sector appointees made by the board, with 1 coming from each economic development zone, We're literally talking about dividing the county up just by 4 and making sure that we've got folks from all over the county. Let me stop there.
Mr. Livingston, you're recognized.
When you say by the board, you talk about those 5 members
The initial appointments,
The initial
yes.
5?
Yes,
would select the 4.
yes. Or effectively, the council could as well. That's something we could explore, Mr. Livingston.
That initial 5 would have at least 3 council members on it, though.
Yes, sir.
Any questions, comments? I guess based off this suggestion, we would still see the Economic Development Committee still exist as a standing committee for council. So even though we would have members serving on the P3, the thought and process would be that the P3 board would vote on something, but then that would go to the committee with a recommendation before it goes to council. Is that based off this suggestion? Is that the process?
Yes, and I think we should talk through that a little bit. And I think I may have used an example with you, Chairman Mackey, so forgive me if I'm repeating the same example. But, you know, over the past 5 years, council has had various kinds of commercial incentives. And they've been very targeted, designed to generate, you know, additional multifamily projects that, because we have a dearth of multifamily housing. That was a request that was made. It sort of came from the outside. The Economic Development Committee thought about it. We ended up drafting a policy around it. But there's been a lot of conversation about it. Right? You know, is it still working? Does it need to be tweaked? And so the idea would be that some of that feedback could come from our P3 board. We could say to them, this has been our process and our procedure, and this has been our policy for 5 years. Is it working? Private partners, tell us, is it working? Give us some feedback so that when we sit as a committee, we're hearing not only the voice of, you know, 1 or 2 developers, but we're hearing the voice of the private sector as to whether or not it's a good thing. Or, you know, there may be instances where there are things coming that we haven't thought about yet. There might be needs in the community that we haven't thought about. And we would get that feedback from the P3 to stay ahead of the game so that we're adopting policies in advance of a request because we've been informed by our P3 partners that there's some needs in the community that need to be addressed. So their involvement, the involvement of the P3, I would view very much as advisory, as collaborative, as a partnership, because all of us want to see the county grow, right? This entire idea springs from an economic development strategic planning report that the county has invested in. But in terms of incentive approval and decisions that are made that are binding, those now rest with the committee and the council, and they would continue to rest with the committee and the council.
I guess, can you also maybe talk a little bit?
No,
Mr.
Madam
Attorney
Chair.
Wright, you recognize?
Right. No, I just wanted to say is that I think the idea is that what council and Richland County has now will still exist. This is adding to, not taken away. So the Economic Development Committee will still exist. County council, and things will still go before them. County council will still exist. I would recommend, I mean, this is just me, and my experience
all out there right
is,
now.
is that, you know, we also still have an economic development department that may work for or may staff, let's say, the P3. But from my viewpoint and how I guess I've dealt with them in the past is that Richland County would still have what it still has now. It would just be, and with the addition of this private partnership that allows things to be done that may not be able to be done currently.
Thank you for that. I think, you know, my question was just kind of process and thinking about what type of stuff when it comes from the P3, is it going to committee or would it just go straight to council, and kind of understanding the process. But definitely agree, I think that the body would still want the committee as a whole. So thank you, Attorney Wright. The other thing I was going to ask is that based on this, I guess, can you maybe give an example of some other areas that the board could help with? Because I know we've talked about, well, maybe, yes, they can review stuff, but, you know, will they help fundraise, or will they, like, what are some other things necessarily that they could be helpful for?
So let's start with fundraising.
Yeah.
So in an earlier presentation, it's not in what's before you tonight, but in an earlier conversation that we've had with council, it may have been in a work session, we talked about, well, how did we envision this being funded? And make no mistake about it, and this is very typical around the state, most of the dollars that fund these operations are public dollars. They also raise money through various mechanisms, right? So for instance, if you want to serve on the board, there may be a donation to be made. There may be just a solicitation from the P3 to the private sector. Those funds are intended to be raised to assist with travel and entertainment expenses that are associated with economic development. You know, I think you and I were talking about this, Patrick, that, you know, when Scout Motors came, some of the largest tents ever to be rented in South Carolina were put up on that site out there. And there was a scramble in the background to figure out who exactly was going to be able to pay for the tents. And simply because it had to happen quickly, you know, there was no time to procure it. And so, you know, some private folks stepped up and helped pay for that. And so those are the kinds of things we're talking about. We do not envision at any point that more than 20% of the operating budget, and it's probably more like 10%, to be honest with you, would be privately sourced and raised. But we do think it is important that not only do we ask, I think we want three things from the private sector. We would know that we had succeeded if we got three things out of this effort for the county. One would be a stronger relationship with other private sector concerns who are leaning in with their time, with their expertise, and their relationships to assist the county's economic development efforts, right? So time, 2, relationships, and 3, that they're willing to invest directly into the county's economic development undertaking. And so I think those 3 things are really important, and of those 3, I think time and relationship are more important than dollars, but dollars would be nice.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, you recognize.
I think there was a whole lot more flexibility. Red tape of the government whereby I think about times when things popped up like, well, should we do the student housing incentive? Someone comes with an idea, should we purchase land and so forth? You have a professional group and all, and can very quick. I could just spend a lot of time trying to figure it all out ourselves. And in this case, that's not. We wouldn't have to worry about that. And I think Ray mentioned the most important thing probably about relationships and so forth. You know, you have someone to go to when you have a real serious question about economic development matter.
Can I add 2 things to that, Madam Chair? And these are things that we talked about, but just now that we're here, I just want to make sure we sort of have it all on the table. Not only could that group help us decide what to do, I hope they might be helpful helping us decide what not to do. You know, from time to time, we have groups approach the county with opportunities, and I'm putting those in quotes, that the economic development wrestles with, the committee wrestles with, because on the one hand, we want to be business friendly. On the other hand, sometimes folks don't bring us, you know, fantastic opportunities. And so it would be really, I think, helpful to the committee if some of those items had been run through a group of private individuals who just said, you know, we've looked at it too, and we're not sending it with a recommendation. It would be helpful to get that feedback so that you knew. The second thing that I wanted to just make sure we were aware of is involving the private sector in economic development doesn't mean that their input or their relationships are contained to economic development. So for instance, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about, you know, what we might do with the next transportation penny, and whether we would seek other opportunities to do that in the future. Having a sounding board to support those efforts, to give us a little feedback if we need some, would also be helpful. And certainly I would argue, and I think y'all would agree, that good transportation infrastructure is important to economic development, so I think it would have an interest in it. It would just be nice to have some additional voices in the community that support what we're doing.
In
Madam Chair.
addition to, yes, hold on, sorry. In addition to the kind of this setup with the initial board, if you start with 9 members, that's not a end all be all. Like if you started this way, but then, after a year we realize maybe we're missing something or somebody, you can add? Or is this once you kind of create 9, you stay?
We can make and provide for modifications to the way the nonprofit functions. And what we might do, and Patrick and I haven't talked about this, but what we could do is we could provide for a larger board and simply start with the appointment of 9. And then, it'd be up to the county if it was going to appoint more members.
Attorney Wright?
Yes, and one thing I just want to say is that one of the other benefits is that when you have situations where things need to move very fast, very quickly, where as a governmental entity we have certain restrictions, and like procurement, for example, things could take months. Whereas like if you need something done in weeks, that could potentially kill a deal that could have been beneficial to the county. So when you have a private entity that doesn't have the same restrictions, that's beneficial because they may be able to procure something in days that would take us months. So that's another potential benefit.
Councilwoman Newton, did you have any questions or comments?
Many, but I'll just ask 1 or 2 questions. So first, can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
My question is about the organizational structure of the P3. And I understand that what we're looking at right now is just a proposal for consideration, but let's take what's been proposed. I guess I'm a little confused because on the one hand, I'm hearing that council would establish the initial parameters of the board, and therefore we would be able to determine makeup and that kind of thing. On the other hand, it sounds like I'm also hearing that at some point the board would become, let's say, self-governing. And I guess my question is, does council always retain the ability to change the makeup of the board? And by makeup, I'm not really talking about individual members as much as, those parameters that we talked about. Does council always retain the ability to direct that, or at some point does that move away and go to the P3 itself? And hopefully that question makes sense.
Mr. Jones?
That question does make sense. And so we envision that the county would always have direct input on 5 of the 9 members. We envision that the bylaws of the corporation, however, would provide for the terms of those members. And we also envision that the 4 members, the other 4, if you will, would begin to be appointed by the board versus county council. Your question about whether or not the county can maintain control presents, I think, 2 interesting points of discussion for the committee. One is, if the council retains too much control, it's really not a separate organization. One of the reasons we want a P3 is so that it is not the county exactly. We want it to have, as Mr. Wright talked about, some ability to be nimble. Likewise, we want the county to be separate enough from it so that if the P3 ever has a misstep, that the county itself is protected from P3 missteps. However, the county will always be the major source of funding. The chair, the vice chair, and the economic development chair will always be on the board. So to the extent the county wants to see changes made, I think the county is in a perfect position to ensure those changes are made because otherwise it has the ability not to fund.
Ms. Newton, did that clarify or answer your question?
I think so. So I think what I heard is yes, initially council determines the structure. One moment. Later, that the P3 takes on those responsibilities, but that a self-interested party would always receive input from the funding body and 3 members of the board. Is that correct?
Well, I guess my takeaway was, and Mr. Jones, you correct, but I guess based on this proposal, I'm seeing the first bullet, the county council chair, vice chair, and chair of EDC, plus the 2 private sector appointees. Those are the 5 that council is always going to have say over.
Correct.
And then the 4 private sectors by the regions, once the P3 board is established, those 4 moving forward will be selected and approved by the board, but that's still made up majority of the 5 that council selected.
Correct.
Is that what you're understanding, Ms. Newton, or were you looking at it differently?
No, that I was not looking at the other appointees from the county, and so thanks for highlighting that again. So thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions from anyone as far as kind of this initial makeup of I like starting off with 9. I think that's good. I would like to see maybe the possibility of, if we need more, having it there. And I only say that because I do think about the 4 private sector. I think is good, but I also think it's sometimes good to have some of our other partners when you talk about educational institutions. So maybe the additional seats outside of these 9 are specific to a particular industry. So I know education is a part of economic development as well. So making sure we have them at the table might be another seat to consider. So I like the initial 9, but didn't want to necessarily tie it to where we could. It's too much if we needed to add somebody else. If that makes sense.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Attorney Wright.
look, I think the one thing you do have to consider, though, is that the kind of the percentage makeup, whereas you have the 3 council members that are going to be a part and the 2 appointees, the more you add, the less, I guess.
Do they all have? Couldn't they be ex officio? Do they all have to be? Does that make sense? What I'm saying? Do they all?
Right,
have
you
to
can have
votes?
ex officio,
That's what I
right.
was-
Yeah, if
Right,
like
you
if
can
I
have
say
ex officio members,
somebody
right, or
from-
non-voting members,
Yeah,
right.
from University of
yes.
South Carolina, we always have somebody, even though they're
Right.
ex officio, but they're at the table
Right.
to give us feedback. Okay.
That, yeah, you can do that.
Okay. Any other thoughts, concerns, or things considerations?
I think that's kind of a reasonable place to start for me, at least at this particular point, until I come up with something else.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
thank you. I do have another question, and
yes, sorry.
if you have used this language already, Mr. Jones, I apologize, but this is a question part of framing and part of function. So as it relates to framing and looking at this body, would you say that it is fair to characterize this body as an advisory body? Or is that insufficient? And then I guess my second question would be, just as we look at this proposal, because so many counties and municipalities do this differently, if it is simply an advisory body, that granted has the ability to spend funds a different way and collect funds a different way. Are there, I guess, alternate ways that we might just set up such an advisory body? Actually, I'll take that question offline because I think it might be too broad. So if you just address the first part of my question.
I don't think it's solely an advisory body. I think it provides, and it has an advisory capacity to the county on various items. I think it should function, if it functions best, it functions in a partnership capacity, which is why the report that was submitted to council at council's behest suggests a deeper relationship with the P3 than more of an ad hoc advisory committee. It suggests a relationship in which the county and the P3 work together.
Ms. Newton, did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. I would, I guess, like to see, if possible, Mr. Jones, a proposed kind of map of what it would look like if we divided the county into 4 development zones. So maybe we can look at that and get feedback and kind of see what that possibly might look like. Do you think you can do that? Do you need more direction from us to kind of break up the zones, or?
I can make a proposal that would be pretty rudimentary. It would be geographic and just see if that works. There might be some other considerations. Yeah, right, there might be something we can take advantage of that's already been constructed.
I think that would be good to kind of get back to the committee and look at it as we talk about the 4 private sector appointees. And then when we also talk about, the 2 private sector, the 4 private sector, is there any consideration that the committee needs to think about as far as industry tied to those? Or I don't know if there's any thoughts or recommendations on that we maybe need to think about. That would be good, I think, too, so we can give feedback on what that looks like, or if we just open.
So far, it's been really the thought is, business leaders whose relationship and opinions and hopefully influence could be of help to the county. But I agree with you. All respect to my friends in the banking industry, I don't think we want 6 bankers.
Oh.
We want, a nice cross-section. And I think we could frame it that way. So I think if we came back with a proposal, we could provide some language to the committee to consider to enable it to ensure that those 6, at least from an industry standpoint, are diverse.
Mr. Livingston, Mr. Weaver, Ms. Newton, anything else you would like to have staff or Mr. Jones work to provide us additional information on as we consider this kind of appointment of the board sphere? All right. Well, I thank you for your time. I think that is a good place. Do you, as far as next steps, anything else you want to recap on? I know you're going to bring this information back and we'll discuss it. Anything else you need to add at this point?
No, this was extremely helpful. I think if it's the committee's pleasure to walk through all the spheres of control and think through it broadly and even at a granular level the way we have here today, I think it'd be great. There is a timeline at the very end of this, Madam Chair, if you don't mind scrolling to that a little bit further. The timeline just should be probably the last slide. So there we go, right there. The timeline suggests that we would be in a position to make some recommendations to council by March of next year. That is not anything that's set in stone, but just by way of thinking about our work, and I know this committee has got other things it's got to deal with. That's at least a goal, to try to work through things and have some recommendations to take to council.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, we're at, number 5. Does anybody have any other items they want to discuss? Okay, number 6, adjournment. Second.
Livingston,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.